Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly P&Q&C&A&T video. This is season 6, episode 8. Quick rundown. What is P&Q&C&A&T?
Oh, you caught me off guard. All right, podcasts, questions, comments, answers, and talk.
That's talking.
Talking.
You gotta use the right case. What's the term for that? When you add an ing. I should know. I took a linguistics class.
It's the verb tense. It's a gerund.
Verb tense. Okay, yeah, because I know that the ing is suffixational affix. But...
Right, can I tell you something that's really weird though? I mean, just starting at the fact that we're in the same room, which we're usually not lately, is that I was almost the whole thing. I was getting ready to count down so we could time the audio right.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Need to.
It's a suffixational affix, and it's also it's not. Oh wow, I had it and then I lost it when you're talking about timing it down. Never mind. There was
All right.
There was a characteristic of it. I was trying to flex my linguistics knowledge on you, but I guess now I just looked the fool.
So that's a strange flex, but okay.
Oh, it's inflectional. It's not derivational.
Okay, I have no idea what you're talking about. Let's just get into the
okay.
Injustice I know about. Let's talk injustice.
Okay, so we answer questions here every week. We also talk about a lot of things that aren't questions. That's what the T. That's where the T comes in. And our first question this week comes from Eddy G 28, and they say, at BDCKR, what, in your opinion, would you recommend? Eluding all your metal characters evenly, or for instance, both my Batman, Ninja Joker, and Batman are 1060, and working on Nightwing to get him up to par with his teammates. It's going to take a while to get Nightwing to be of any effect, as I'm just going to get him to Elite 2, because I got one copy and need one more. Joker at Elite 1, and Ares Elite 0, level 50. It just has me thinking on how to elite these characters. The Batman Ninja Trio is a force all in itself, but I want to get your opinion on how you all would go about it. Thank you for the question.
Yeah. All right, so that's interesting because what it sounds like you've got is a totally maxed out Batman Ninja Joker who's great because he's got a great defensive passive where when he's outnumbered. Your problem is on that team, he's the strongest one. So... Well, actually, that's not a problem. There's a good chance you're going to be outnumbered because... All right, so here's the thing. Maybe I should just start off with my assumptions. To me, Metal Nightwing's best feature... I was going to say Metal Robin. His best feature is his passive.
Because you've been watching Titans, so that's why you would have said Robin.
I was watching Titans, and it's... it has some... All right, so we were talking about this earlier.
Yeah, I've been told it's bad.
And I feel like part of it was because when
you know what we should do? Let's answer the question first, and then let's talk about Titans right after that. Actually.
All right, okay. So his passive is the best thing about him, where he steals all that power, and everybody on his team steals power, and you can see how great a passive is. That's really he's giving the entire team Regime Raven's passive or Rebirth Raven's passive. I can't remember Rebirth. It's Rebirth.
Yeah.
For nothing. And what actually makes it even better is by having weaker teammates, he's very likely going to be outnumbered and he'll take even less damage.
Yeah.
So he's one of those few guys where having an unbalanced team doesn't hurt him as long as he's the strongest guy on the team. You don't want him to be the weakest guy. And I think because Metal Nightwing's so weak, I'd probably want to elite up the Batman Ninja Lord Joker and bring him up as high as you can because he's going to be dead. It's basically a second dead slot. And if you just leave it like that, then you're sort of gambling a little bit. Chances are you're not going to run into trouble with Batman Ninja Batman. It's just I have to figure out how many Batmans and how many ninjas there are in his name.
Yeah.
To lose when he's outnumbered.
Batman Ninja, the Ninja Batman.
Yeah, the problem really is when you've got a team that's only one guy, you lose all the benefit of being able to tag out, whether that's to rinse damage over time, or whether it's to trigger, let's say you've got Tantu Totem on him, right? So it's better probably to have at least a second guy who can hold his own on the team, and especially since if you want to take advantage of Nightwing's passive, you need to be able to tag in and out. And so if you're not going to take advantage of that and expect to end up being 1-on-3 fight right at the beginning, you might as well just stick in a couple bronze characters, right? Ares is hard.
Sorry, before we get too far away, I had a joke, and there's not a good place to make it, and it's not a very funny joke, so taking this time out of you talking. But Batman Ninja Batman is kind of like the Los Angeles Angels, I imagine, if you're bilingual. It's just like...
it's like Arrow Green Arrow.
It's just stacks on stacks on stacks.
Yeah, pizza pie.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted an aside, and it wasn't worth it, but it was going to bug me.
Oh, I love those. I love those asides.
Okay.
All right, so I think that's the question. I think with Ares, you have no control. He's he's a multiplayer exclusive. Get him when you can. I think he's really worth it. He makes a great splash damage. Maybe we should link to that one team that we did most recently where he does a massive amount of damage. And because even if it whiffs, it's great because the second part of this passive means that the other team can't block for a while.
Yeah.
And that means he's vulnerable to back row, who's a good second person to have on your Ares splash team. All right, so getting back to Titans.
It's funny because you put this question. Okay. We talked just before the video started. You're like, I'm going to put a question first so that we can actually talk about Injustice. And we almost half answered the question and then got totally sidetracked.
Okay, but so, to me, Titans is sort of Injustice. Right there, we got Nightwing.
Adjacent, yeah.
And we got Raven. And they're both in the Titans show.
You don't have Cyborg, right?
Cyborg is not
Titans.
in Titans. He should be. He was in Justice League even, and he's not in Titans. Or maybe he shows up.
Perhaps it was too much budget.
Well, listen, what was cool... All right, so here's the thing. I spent a lot of time not having access to comics, really loving the idea of comics. So when I'd read comics at the library, they would have Amethyst, and they would have Warlord. And so I grew up... Those were... You know, those kind of favorites, not because you choose them, but because they happen to be there.
They're thrust upon you.
They are thrust upon
They're
me.
favorites because of nostalgia, not necessarily equality.
Exactly. And the other thing I could read was Titans, because at the supermarket checkout, the same way they have, you see Archie's Double Digest, they used to have Titans Digest, and they would reprint a bunch of Titans comic books, and they were the old classic ones drawn by George Perez and written by Marv Wolfman. So... I feel like I enjoyed it probably more than I should. I recognize that there are some problems in the Titans, and they go all grimdark, like, you know, the whole late 80s kind of lesson where people took the wrong lesson from the success of Watchmen and Dark Knight. It wasn't that they were sort of gritty, yeah.
That wasn't the point.
It was that they were written by a couple of really good writers. So Frank Miller and Alan Moore, the great Alan Moore.
Yeah, they took kind of like the surface level characteristics and not actually the part that made it worth having them gritty.
Right.
They kind of took out the reimagining part and just added in the gore and the I'm kind of dark and I kill people sometimes part.
See, this is, and I love the fact that in Titan, there's certain things they did great, like the fact that they put Doom Patrol in.
Yeah.
I think that was hilarious. I still have the first Grant Morrison issue of when he first started doing Doom Patrol.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, so maybe it is, like you're saying, maybe it's the nostalgia.
Yeah, because I've heard not great things about it from a couple people.
Yeah, listen, Nightwing is a little too angsty. You know,
Batman.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely flaws, but the fact that they stuck in Doom Patrol and they put in Hawk and Dove and all these kind of ancillary characters that haven't had their own series yet, but before they've even decided that the really Titans team is a thing, I kind of like that it's sort of in the DC universe and they're introducing some interesting characters. Funny story about Hawk and Dove. I believe that was where Rob Liefeld first made his name, and he's really got a reputation now for drawing anatomically incorrect. But at the time, instead of just exaggerating stuff, there was a really dynamic quality to his art.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't polished, but you'd see that in a lot of new artists, where you'd think, okay, so that looks kind of good, and you could see the trajectory where he might be headed. The same way Jim Lee. When Jim Lee started as an artist, and I think I first noticed him in the Punisher War Journal, and he ended up being like a really big, when he started doing X-Men, he hit it really big. It's like that. But, you know, clearly he went in a whole different direction instead of better.
I think the word you're looking for is worse.
Yes.
The completely opposite direction from better. So there we go. Our next question or comment comes from Jared Lopez, and they say, I was listening to your last podcast where BDCKR Gaming Senior mentioned he was pro-choice. I would assume BDCKR Gaming Junior is also pro-choice. I would like to ask you guys, when do you believe life begins? People who are pro-life maintain that life begins at conception. If this is true, would you still be pro-choice? And also, do you guys have names/nicknames that we can call you by? Well, if you're referring to one of us specifically, sorry, I'm transitioned right into the question.
Yes.
Thank you for the question, Jared. If you're referring to us specifically and individually, you can refer to me as Abbott, and you as Costello.
I'm Costello.
And that was coined by iProphet, and it was it caught on because we didn't have anything before then, and he pretty consistently wanted to refer to one or the other of us, and I think this was at a point where nobody really cared. You know, it was just sort of we were one entity. So
we are BDCKR.
We are just So
I mean, you could be BDCKR and I could be gaming, and that could be the conceit.
That would be a weird flip because I play a lot more games than you do.
I know that would be
as
an
a
ironic
general
kind of
rule.
name,
but you play more Injustice. I play more just games in general.
That's true.
But so I think one thing that I want, because you have some stuff here and you have some stuff to say, and
yeah,
I think some informed stuff to say. But real quick,
the first part is are you pro-choice?
Oh, totally pro-choice. Yeah,
and
for sure.
All right. So how much of it was influenced by what I've told you, and how much of it was something that you came to on your own?
I think I started from your belief system. I think that's how a lot of kids end up doing it.
Right.
And I know a lot of people that I think have more positive belief systems despite their parents.
Right.
And, I think I'm one of the people that has a more positive belief system because of their parents. But I think at the end of the day, it's been important enough to me that I have looked into it and kind of formed my own opinions. And I've just found that you guys have set me up pretty well to have what I believe the right opinions are to be. And, obviously...
Well, I don't know. The right opinions are just something that you are comfortable with, that suits your value system.
Yeah, that's true. And I think one of the things that I want to address here is the thing... Because this is the conversation that we're having. It's when do you believe life begins? And I think the problem is at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we believe, right? There's a kind of truth. And the problem with the term life, and I know you get into this later, so I don't really want to steal your thunder, but the problem with the term life is that it's broad enough that it allows us to kind of ascribe our own belief systems onto it. And I think that means that there's kind of fundamentally a sort of issue with our definitions that we've defined for having this argument, because it lets you just say, oh, well, I believe this, and somebody else say, oh, well, I believe that, and you don't really get to reach a conclusion.
Especially when you're using a definition that's relatively ambiguous.
Yeah.
And that people end up talking past each other instead of actually discussing the same point.
Yeah, exactly, because when you're arguing, you're not really arguing that one person is right and the other is wrong. 'Cause that's not usually even the argument that's happening, even though it should be, right? It should be an argument over what's correct, but really you're working with different definitions, and nobody establishes them great. And some people are straight up wrong, but some people are kind of right in their own way, and then you can have different discussions.
This is actually the perfect thing example of this, because in my idea of an argument is actually away from the conflict, is that I just want to be able to explain what I believe clearly enough.
Yeah.
And if I convince you, that's all right. I don't really need to convince you. I just need to be comfortable enough with my own idea that I know what I mean and what I'm saying.
And to me, this has higher stakes than that. I'm okay with that normally. I think having an argument as a way of cementing your ideas and then having them challenged subsequently is great. But I think the problem is that this has real-world ramifications. And I think the problem with even us having this discussion, as well as a lot of other people, is... especially the people who are arguing against it, is that at the end of the day, we don't have skin in the game. This is a fun little philosophical question for us of, where does life begin? Yeah. But the people that this ends up actually mattering to aren't us, and they don't have the luxury of being able to sit here and kind of talk about it like it's,
abstract. That's actually a really good point. I didn't mean to be so flip about it.
Yeah.
It's that...
I wasn't like calling you out.
No, but in the cases where people are using a particular point of view to infringe upon other people, then I totally get where it has to become a conflict.
Yeah.
So maybe if I get to the actual question from Jared Lopez, and thank you actually for asking this, I think it's probably the wrong question. And you know how some people, there's that cliche, so there's no such thing as bad question. I think when you set it up a certain way, then you've anchored it and framed it in a way that makes it less clear. Because first question is, what's life? Because you can make the argument that sperm is live, the egg is live at a cellular level.
That's true.
Before any kind of conception, there's still something living there.
Yeah.
So there's also, after conception, there's a fetus, and after birth, there's a baby. Every single one of those is life.
Yeah, and the problem with the term life, I mean, this is obviously not what some people mean. This is a little bit pedantic to bring it down to the level. But, I mean, if you're just talking about life and ending it, there's, you talk about, like, microscopic life, you talk about, like, anybody who eats meat, right? The problem is we're using a really big term, and we're kind of working off the premise of the second that you say, not life, but human life,
right,
it totally changes what it means. So we're working under the assumption, because, it's all alive, right? Like
yeah,
you
but
just argued.
we prioritize human life over other life, like exactly like you said, right? We prioritize it over our food, over pests, over infections, parasites,
So
anything.
you could argue that life exists even before the moment of conception in the prerequisite components, but that's not the question. The question is, when does human life begin?
And I think the argument that I've always appreciated the best is viability, right?
Yeah.
And there's actual numbers on that. So 21 weeks and less, the viability of a fetus. And so we're going to be very specific about the term so we don't get it all mixed up and get this sort of that whole...
We're not going to say of a baby.
Yeah, the emotional kind of arguments that are made, we're going to try to avoid that. But 21 weeks and less is 0%. So clearly, to me, that's... Whether there's a human life there or not, the fact that it's not viable outside the mom means that what you have to make a decision between a person who's actually there in front of you, or the potential for a person that cannot survive without being incubated, by this actual human life. And it gets higher, right? So at 22 weeks is 0 to 10%. 23 weeks is supposed to be 10 to 35. I did some research for this podcast, actually, which is unusual for me. And so the decision becomes, all right, so is if we don't make the argument that the fetus has to be born and become a baby before it's human life, then at what point does the viability argument push that date back from 40 weeks or whenever like a baby is born to the point where you can say that this life, which may or may not be human yet, has equal rights to somebody who's already there. And I think you can't ignore the fact that when they can survive on their own, independent of the woman, that you can make the better argument for. So I think that it's sort of critical, and I don't know that you can actually know when you're talking about a chance, right?
Yeah, and the problem is there's so many different ways to attack this argument, right? And by attack this argument, I mean just this debate as a whole, not like the specific people making it.
Right.
One of the ways that you can talk about it, which to me always seemed like a decent argument that's only really meant to appeal to the people who already don't think abortion should be allowed the way that it is that it doesn't prevent abortion, it prevents safe abortions, right? The people who need it, it's the same thing with the war on drugs, which is, another whole kind of separate issue that I don't think we need to talk about here. But you're not preventing people who are highly motivated or people who are in desperate situations. You're preventing them from doing it safely.
Right.
And so the problem is that argument is a really compelling reason for me to say that we should allow abortions just, on a fundamental, for the same reason why people say that we shouldn't, which is that you're just respecting the value of human life, and kind of not allowing it is jeopardizing the value of human life in a totally different way. And I'm more confident that a pregnant mom, or not a pregnant mom, but a pregnant potential mother, right? I'm much more confident that I value that person's health and safety than I do that of like an early stage of development fetus, for sure.
Right. And this is the thing to keep in mind, right? I mean, not so much in Canada, but in the U.S., for example, I think the U.S. has one of the highest maternal mortality rates. So among first world countries. So carrying on a pregnancy, especially one that's not wanted, is not without risk. So what you're doing is, if you are forcing a woman to deliver, not now, but like however many weeks later it'll take before the fetus is viable, you are putting her at physical risk. And it's not huge for most women, but some cases it's actually pretty significant.
Yeah, and I have something a little lighter. This is just an interesting fact. It has nothing to do with abortion, because it doesn't really kind of stand up to any sort of critical thought if you try to use it as an argument for abortion. But here's something interesting. So small mammals run really fast. They have high heart rates and everything. And the bigger you are, generally the slower you go. The vital signs of developing fetus, even after they've developed their organs, their heart and everything, their like heart rate matches the mother until they're born, and you can actually see them speed up and kind of become like more their own entity, than almost acting like an organ as part of the mom when they're born.
That's interesting. I never knew that.
Because they go slow when they're in the mom, and then their vitals speed up. And I think I heard that on, it was some educational YouTube channel, so it would have been something like SciShow or maybe Kurt's Gazette.
You know why that makes sense, though? Because when you're a smaller animal, you're moving a lot smaller volume of oxygen when you're breathing. So you actually need to get that blood through the lungs to catch as much of the little bit. But when you're a fetus, you're getting all the oxygenated blood through the placenta, and that's already oxygenated. The breathing actually makes no difference, so you don't actually have to pump any harder because that blood is well oxygenated without having to move. So it's more just
practicing. It's building up the kind of muscle.
Right, and actually the practice is probably harder because all that fluid is harder to move than air.
That's true. But so that's just something interesting. Obviously, that's not a good abortion thing, being like, oh, they're more like an organ than a person, because obviously that happens up until the moment of birth, and you wouldn't argue, or as far as I'm aware, again, I'm not 100% sure on that, but, and, you know, obviously no one would make the argument that a baby moments before being born didn't count.
Oh, yeah, for sure. What's interesting to me is just thinking about this question made me consider something from maybe a different perspective. So let's say this child were born.
Yeah.
There's something called informed consent. The idea of informed consent, where you need to be, it's not that you have to be old enough, that you just have to have the intellectual capability to understand what choices you're making when it comes to, say, health decisions, and what the implications are of picking one thing over another. And so when people are incapable of consent, especially very young children or incapacitated adults, you get a substitute decision maker. So when, so let's say...
Oh, that was cool. We just blocked a full super. I should
nice. I like when that happens, right? When you tag in just at the right moment, you've got the astro harness.
Oh, we should mention, because we just made reference to the video. This also exists as a podcast. We forgot to mention that at the top of the show.
Yeah, it was a Flashpoint team, and Aquaman wanted to do a super on us, and we just totally avoided it with astro harness.
But yeah, so you can listen to this in podcast format. Links to that in the description. We are now on Apple Podcasts, so for anybody that matters to... there you go. Actually,
and you know what, too? When you're facing someone with Tantu Totem, sometimes it's almost a better strategy to let them build up to 3 bars of power. So whatever you can do to avoid a tag in, it's better, because when they do a super, they lose all their power. If they do a special 2 and you avoid it with the Astral Harness, they get their power right back. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so hold on.
Substitute decision makers, informed consent.
Yeah, so substitute decision makers. So if let's say the fetus was born and it was a baby, if it had a health problem, that mom would be making a decision about their health, whether it's something to get treatment or for palliative care, or if they decided to, like when somebody's really sick and they're being kept alive by machines, to decide that they don't want them to suffer anymore. So in effect, they're, for, let's say, really bad fetal abnormalities, having a termination is very much the equivalent of that if you consider the fetus a capable being, which I don't, unless they get to the point where they can live independently from the mom and don't require the mom, or the woman, sorry, I said I was going to be precise and I'm not, would require the woman to risk her life in order for that fetus to survive. Yeah. Oh, and sometimes there's the argument about sticking the man in and talking about whether...
Oh, yeah, what rights does the man get?
I mean, ultimately, when you talk about substitute decision-making, there's only 2 people that have the say, right? Like, so when you've got a kid, the mom and dad are. So you've got 2 votes. If there's a disagreement, I think the tiebreak really should go to the person who's got, like you said, more skin in the game, where they're actually putting their lives at risk. And it may be at the point where the dad could actually take over if the dad decided, or the man decided that I don't want to terminate, I want this carried to term, and they were able to take over, I'd be totally with that.
And I also think that the argument can be made that if the issue is that, like, for some reason the prospective woman to be giving birth is going to terminate the pregnancy and the dude is going to be blindsided and shut out, that is an indication of a relationship with not a lot of trust,
right?
And that's not a great kind of situation for a kid to be born into, where only one of the parents actually wanted it. And you could look for edge cases where you could find an example of a time where it probably would be better to give the dad some sort of option, where there's probably one like specific kind of situation under the sun where I can imagine it being weird or unfair for the woman to take that choice away, right? But I think at the end of the day, that's sort of like a bad faith argument, because it's one of those like weird theoreticals where it's like, well, what if Superman like ripped the roof off the hospital and said, no, you need to keep the baby? It's like
speaking of theoretical, all right, so here's the other thing too. I mean, I'm not saying that it would change anything, because even if there was better support, there was better contraception, there was better sex education, there was better access to social safety nets for newborns and their parents or parent who are having trouble, that wouldn't be enough to take that decision away from the woman. So I don't want to say that at all, but I think it's very telling that the legislation that attempts to make abortion more difficult, when it's they legislate, or they try to legislate that, it's very telling that it isn't tied into any of those things that actually are pro-life.
Yeah, where that's the thing where you have to ask if it's a question of belief or rhetoric.
Right.
And I think there was something really interesting related to that I saw recently, where there was some discriminatory housing bill, or it wasn't a bill, it was something for like a local government. They had like some ordinance or something that was going to go through, and this trans woman came to like a city hall meeting and was like, hey, I know you're quoting the Bible as your reason for talking about it like this, and she quoted a passage from Leviticus talking about like if a man lies with another man as he lies with a woman, he should be stoned. And she was like, I brought a rock. Like, tell me that it's not just you're not just using rhetoric to hide your crappy beliefs, and do like basically man up. And he actually dropped it. So that was just something really cool that I saw recently. Again, it's not super related, but
yeah, I think that there's definitely a place for the Bible. I don't want to, because I was raised Catholic.
Yeah.
But to use that literally as your guide for what you should do now, I think is a mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of stuff that if you take it literally would be just awful.
We are getting into the weeds.
Yeah, we got, so maybe
we should maybe back out a little bit.
Yeah, because we got lots of questions, and we've got one from iProphet. Or known as iProphet 3 on YouTube.
So iProphet 3 says, to start off addressing me, Suits pretty much does a new case per episode throughout all their seasons. It's really entertaining. I actually grasped a ton of law knowledge by watching all the seasons. And then, also, I disagree on damage over time. In my opinion, best damage over time is no questions asked, Flashpoint Deathstroke. Sure, you may need Flashpoint Bats for the ×2 crit, but the damage is just insane. You can beat the last page on your story mode with an Elite 5 Flashpoint Deathstroke equipped with Quake Engine. Can't say the same with just Injustice 2 Aquaman or Arkham Knight Catwoman. Also, I still believe Flashpoint Team is still the best multiplayer there is. Just my opinion, though. And then we've got a series of questions.
Yeah, maybe I should summarize that, because we could spend the rest of the video just reading it back and forth. But I think the point was, I agree. This becomes one of those semantic questions, right? Because here's the thing, and we already went into the comments, but I think it bears maybe a little discussion because most people don't read all the comments, right? But Flashpoint Deathstroke. So it's a special 2 that does the damage over time. The thing is, with a Flashpoint team, with both Flashpoint Batman's passive to boost crit damage, plus Deathstroke's own passive, where his teammates, if both Flashpoint teammates are alive. I mean, I know the game, it's supposed to be knocked out. They don't actually die. That would be bad. But I'm using that as shorthand for, you get rid of them. I always feel funny saying die because it feels bad. Anyways,
it feels final. See, because I like to think about it using the multiverse theory, where there's just an infinite number of them. It's just like they just keep sliding new ones in off the production line. Right, it's like time to open another portal. I don't follow the story. I don't actually know.
Right. All right. So hey, listen, it works for me. I mean, sometimes we can face the same guy in the other team, right? So that's cool.
Yeah, I don't. It doesn't make any sense, but it's a funny thought to me.
Right. So it's
because it's like, oh, yeah, we lost this one. Like,
so to me, the best kind of the best kind of damage over time is you can do it lots, you can do it fast, and bleed is the ultimate. But I can see, because Flashpoint Deathstroke, he does a crap ton of damage. Yeah. So the damage from Flashpoint Deathstroke Special 2 is what we're talking about when we're talking about him as a damage over time guy. Is it that this is a damage over time guy because he happens to do damage over time, although he's already done like a butt ton of damage already from the special itself? Or is it that he's a specialist who happens to do D.O.T, but he's not really a D.O.T specialist?
Yeah.
And to me, so let's say if we're just talking straight, which specialist would you rather have? Oh yeah, Flashpoint Deathstroke, no doubt he's better than Arkham Knight Catwoman or Injustice 2 Aquaman.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about somebody who's a damage over time specialist, so and where I use them the most is for tanks, like Red Sun Green Lantern on a full Red Sun team, or Batman Ninja Batman with King Gold Soda, or maybe and Killer Croc Companion. In my mind, Injustice 2 Aquaman is the best, even better than Arkham Knight Catwoman, and better than Flashpoint Deathstroke, and especially when your damage over time guy is last man standing, because what Injustice 2 Aquaman does, because of his passive, he's not going to get bled out, right? He'll just return the damage over time doubled. Now, Catwoman has the advantage that if they tag out, it's not going to be a problem. But I like being able to not be vulnerable to damage over time myself, because that's going to, when you've made Injustice 2 Aquaman as your last man standing as a tank, that offensive potential is way better than either of the other two. And the bleed out is way better than the other two, because then you can actually finish off the other team.
Yeah. So there we go. Do you want me to read the follow-up by iProphet for us to bounce off of, or is that, do you think, what you wanted to say? Give or take.
I think that's pretty much it. No, because I think we ended up agreeing on it that.
Well, yeah, this wasn't exactly an argument. This wasn't a big falling out.
Well, it was...
or at least not on our end.
I mean, this is what we were talking about earlier, I think, when we were saying that sometimes if you use the terms imprecisely, you end up talking past one another, even when you agree on stuff. And I think ultimately we both agree, well, all three of us agree that, with iProphet's point, that Flashpoint Deathstroke is a great specialist.
Yeah.
He's out of those three, he's the best specialist, but in the subgroup of one's characters that are meant for damage over time, and that sub-specialist, I think Injustice 2 Aquaman is still probably the best damage over time for that niche kind of role.
Yeah. So there we go. Next up, I think we're going to do a continuation of the comment from Drake Pendragon.
Yeah.
So we're starting from the part where he says, affirmative action is a method of providing opportunities based on race, gender, or other categories, and thus is a form of discrimination. There is no such thing as reverse racism. There is just racism. If you're black and hate white people because of their race, you're a racist. If you're white and hate blacks because of their skin color, you're a racist. And, I think to that last part, that's a fair point depending on the definition of racism that you're using.
Right. All right. So here's the thing: words. This is why it's so cool that you're taking. I don't think we had linguistics courses, or if we did, I was totally unaware of them.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends also taking linguistics in more earnest. I think I have a friend taking psycholinguistics, and I also have a friend somewhere else doing speech pathology. So that's linguistics heavy.
All right, and I so know that it's not just based on the popularity of Arrival. Because I think that's really where it's because the fact that they don't pop up in a year, that you've got a whole a division of whatever that university that we have the whole area of study that's dedicated to linguistics. It's
definitely not because of Arrival.
Right, but it's popularized it in a way I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But to me, the simple understanding of racism has evolved. It's not just, well, I am consciously disliking you because of your race.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole level of institutionalism and not institutionalism, institutionalization of biases, and after generations of problematic, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't even think of it. But when you're starting off with, you've been, let me give the example for like First Nations people, right? Where there's a level of cultural genocide that you can't just say, well, we're going to stop being racist to you. You just, go ahead, do whatever you need, and not be able to make up for some of the stuff that they've suffered over the years. It puts them at a huge disadvantage.
Yeah, because the problem is, at the end of the day, you can say, if I am not a racist today, and I believe that everybody else is not a racist today, which already is a premise that I would argue is flawed, and that there are still a lot of facets of discrimination today that need to be dealt with actively. But even if you were to say, hey, everybody, believes everybody else is on a level playing field today, there's still a lot of people that are in the situation that they're in because of the really poor treatment of their ancestors. Right? There's people that are in a position that they're in because of factors totally outside of their control, and they're doing worse than they would be otherwise because of racism.
Right.
There's still aftershocks, and
there's also the unconscious kind of stuff, right? The stuff that happens not because because people are bad, but because people have ideas that are flawed. Yeah. And they let that influence how they treat other people.
Yeah, even if nobody's racist, the little vestigial hooks that have been left in, like institutions that have been historically racist, right? It just practices and there's one of the problems with racism is that people make arguments for like talking about how socioeconomic status is more important, and the problem is those things are inherently intertwined.
Right.
And
intersectionality.
They're not always. They're not in every single context. It's not like everybody who is poor is not white.
Right.
But there is a much higher chance of being poor because you're not white, and because your family was not white.
So here's the thing. I mean, the best analogy I've heard is the way about, I think John Scalzi put this, where you talk about easy mode, right?
Yeah.
So just because you play a game on an easier mode doesn't mean you automatically get everything, but it does mean that you have a bit of advantage. You can still suck and you can still lose.
Yeah.
And somebody else who's got it with, starts off with fewer resources, lower agility, lower strength, lower, what are the stats? I don't remember. But you know what I mean, right? So there's an intersectionality there. So yeah, sure, money makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And money can make up for a lot. But I was reading this interesting stat that showed, or that was saying that people, was it black people in the States, the generation after a given socioeconomic achievement, that they were much more likely to end up being poor again, like to not maintain the level of income that the previous generation had made.
And I think this might be going kind of maybe a layer deeper into theory than we even need to go when discussing affirmative action, but I think it's important to kind of note the idea of race as a social construct. Especially because we have this talk about like white people versus not white people, and it's interesting because the definition of who is historically white was totally subject to change.
Oh yeah.
And basically discriminated groups who were previously considered not white and discriminated against because of it were allowed the privilege of becoming white.
Right, that's why the cultural thing to me is just ridiculous. When people make the argument that it's, there's such a thing as white culture. I mean, for the longest time, Irish people were discriminated against. Italian people were discriminated against.
Yeah, because they weren't white, which is boggles the mind to think about. So it has nothing to do, or I shouldn't say nothing because it doesn't have absolutely nothing, but it has very little to do with the pigment of your skin.
Right.
And here's...
Well, it I
has
guess
some.
There's certain things that will keep you out no matter what.
And I saw a super, super insightful commentary about it. I think it was perhaps Innuendo Studios. If it wasn't, he doesn't really...
So can I comment? Sorry, interrupt. You're cracking your knuckles, and I so envy you.
Sorry.
No. I wish I could crack my knuckles. I haven't cracked my knuckles in 4 weeks now because I got this splint on my hand, and I can't move my fingers the way I want. And I'm so jealous of you cracking your knuckles now.
I did it idly. I didn't realize it would show up in the audio. But I didn't think it would show up in the audio because I didn't think about it at all.
Yeah, but I'm so jealous right now.
But anyways, Innuendo Studios made a really, really kind of insightful point, and I think it was him. It's possible not, but either way, check him out. Which is that, everybody talks about Obama as the first black president, and he was mixed, right?
Right.
And it's not that it's it would be disingenuous to say it, but nobody would ever call him, another white president, right? He is on a fundamental level considered black because he's mixed.
Right.
And the problem is there because being white is something that we kind of ascribe, right? And it's flexible, and it doesn't have to just mean people who have the right skin tone. It is obviously sort of restrictive in that sense, where people who are wildly different skin tones wouldn't be considered white.
Right.
But it's considered kind of a lack of other pigmentation.
Well, or is it that it's the difference between necessary and sufficient? It is not sufficient to just have pale skin.
Yeah.
It is necessary. And if you don't have it, it disqualifies you. But if you have it, that may not be enough.
Yeah, that's okay. That's, I think, a really good way of putting it. But the problem is that when you think about it, we kind of perceive whiteness as a sort of default to be taken away. Because
okay, that's a good point. Yeah, okay.
When Obama has mixed parents, no matter what happens, he is never a white guy ever again, right? That's
right.
So being white is something that you can have if you have a pure white ancestry, right? And that's like a gross way of thinking about it. But when you break down kind of how our beliefs on kind of race and culture are, that is basically what it is. You have to have a purely white ancestry or close enough that you can't tell.
Right.
And any kind of disruption from that takes away your status of being white.
Because it's necessary. And if you don't have the necessary condition, it disqualifies you.
And that's a way that we as a culture generally perceive it. Because, like, I did think of Obama just as sort of, like, a black president, right?
Right.
It really wasn't a thought that ever crossed my mind. It's like, oh yeah, he's mixed, right? I didn't even know that about him.
Right.
I think maybe before that, maybe I'd heard it in passing, but it hadn't really properly registered with me. And it's not a big step from that to the kind of really gross, like, Aryan race purity ideals that some people have, because we as a culture sort of have acknowledged that whiteness is like a question of purity. Just as much as anything else, because whiteness is like a status that can be taken away from you, but it can be granted to a very specific subset of people. But at the end of the day, it is like perceived as like a default state, and it can be taken away by any lack of like racial purity, basically.
Right. It's a very tenuous world.
Okay. We talked.
Maybe
a lot about stuff that ended up being not a lot of affirmative action. I think maybe quickly to address the actual point. At the end of the day, we need to do stuff, right? We can't just like.
You can't say we're going to stop doing the bad stuff and somehow think that's going to be enough. You need to maybe, if you actually want things to be fair, you've got to do something to make up for the injustice that happened before.
Yeah, so I think you can make the argument that certain types of affirmative action are less effective than they should be, maybe looking at actual real data and saying, hey, maybe these aren't working the way that we want them to be. But I don't think that I am willing to concede that affirmative action as an idea is discriminatory or bad.
So here's the next part. I want to read this because this is not ours, what we're saying. This is, again, pulled from Drake Pendragon. And I want to read out this affirmative action negatively affects those who are supposed to be helped by it, because when people look at people who could receive affirmative action, it causes them to question if the individual got to that position on merit or if they got handed it because of some quality that they just had. For example, California has created a law that says that every public company must have a woman on their board. So if a woman is on the board of a company that wasn't there prior to this law being enacted, it will cause people to question if that individual legitimately deserves the position or got it because of a surface trait that she had no control over, and if she is even actually qualified to be there, thus making anything she says have less weight than the things that the men on that board are saying. Oh God! All right, so
you are angry. I could tell the way that you're reading that you're getting a little frustrated.
I wanted to get through it fast because, all right, so here's the thing. That part about people wondering how someone got their position and whether it was merit-based and how people get judged for that, in my mind, I think, who cares? I mean,
you could also say that about literally any dude that's ever on anything. Because
this is it!
The way that you frame it, unless you truly believe that women are just on average worse and that there's no chance that a woman could do the same job as a man, because I think the problem is that even in positions of extreme power, I have a hard time believing that there aren't a ton of people at any given time equally qualified.
This is my point. All right, so we should be looking with that same critical eye at everybody. If Drake only wants to think like that about the women and people of color, that's on Drake. But we've had decades, centuries of men who are minimally qualified or unqualified for their positions, and I mean, maybe I'm gonna get a lot of flack for this, but in Canada, it looks like, the fact that Donald Trump is president, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, had got that security clearance and made a huge number of mistakes on it and was really unqualified and should have been disqualified from it. And people who make the argument that being a businessman qualifies you to be a politician, I was reading this in the news maybe a week or two ago, where there's one of the governors, Scott Walker, and in is it Minneapolis? Or, I don't know, Foxconn. There was a company that was promised a bunch of stuff. They gave them huge tax breaks, and now they're saying, yeah, you know what, we're not going to do what we promised. And there's really no recourse, and what they've done is just dumped a bunch of money, and the question is whether that was just incompetence or whether that was criminal, you know, like a little bit of kickback and stuff. But, I mean, I think it's about time we started looking critically at these bastions of old white men and think about whether they deserve to be there.
Yeah, because I think that's the problem, is that, like, at the end of the day, I think you point to almost any position in the world, and I think it is likely for the vast, vast majority that, you know, there would be hundreds, thousands of people that would be as good or better at the job. And so I think it's maybe disingenuous to say, oh, well, what if they're the most qualified? I think no matter who it is, they're probably not the most qualified person for that job. But and you can point that finger at anybody and say, hey, what if one of the people who applied, the other people who applied was better and didn't get the job? But I think you could point that same finger at almost anybody. I think the chance that you know, just by luck, get the person who's definitely the best for that job
best. Yeah.
is totally questionable for anybody. But I think it belies your kind of personal bias when you're only pointing that finger at the woman. Right. And, you know, it's easy to say that the legislation makes it easy to, but I think at the end of the day, I think the legislation empowers people to kind of be forced to look past what we know is there, which is like unconscious prejudices and actual real prejudices. And you're right, it's not going to always work out, but it's one of those things, again, where I feel like it's worth trying.
Yeah.
It's a valuable thing to do, even if it's not going to have a 100% hit rate.
Yeah, we're at a fight. Maybe I'm going to have to stick in a little bit, or do you want to finish we can add a little bit of, or do you want to drag this on for another one? Because there's a couple of things I do want to say. And I know it's not entirely injustice, and I feel bad about making people listen to this and watch a dead screen. Because there's a college thing.
Yeah.
Do you
want me to? Yeah, we'll finish
please,
it off.
Please.
Okay. Studies have shown that by removing affirmative action from colleges, this is Drake Pendragon.
Yeah.
Again, in the USA, that the largest group affected is Asians, who are currently disproportionately left out of opportunities because they are required 140 more points on their SAT than white students, 270 points higher than Hispanic students, and 450 points higher than black students. The idea of blind hiring is optimal because of the fact that it doesn't allow discrimination on any standard. Diversity does have value. I agree with that. However, I feel that getting the best is worth more than that, even.
Okay, so maybe I'm going to skip past this a little bit to get the part I really want to talk about with the idea of free college tuition. But the whole affirmative action hurting Asian people admissions to schools is so much more complex. It plays hugely into the model minority defense of racism.
Yeah.
And I guess we could get into that a little bit, but what it does is it totally elides past the fact that the history of different people coming to North America is, you know, as much as Asians face racism with, in Canada, the head tax and building the railroad under really disgusting conditions, they weren't brought over as slaves. Mm-hmm. They weren't, I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's, you know what? You want to say something?
Yeah, I think this is maybe getting into the muck a little bit, but I think you could argue that with the current kind of social pressure, especially from parents, that performing really well in school is something that is expected of a lot of Asian people. Right. And so if we're talking about how performance is not necessarily a great indicator of motivation or likelihood of success, you could actually make the argument that there's a lot of external motivators for academic success in certain Asian communities too. Right. Mm-hmm. And so in the same way, it sucks that anybody's putting all that work in being negatively affected. But, you know, this is kind of the way that things are balancing out, where there's different kind of subcultures being whose marks are being valued differently.
And it shouldn't be that the marks are valued differently. This is the same thing I said, I think, last podcast, was that there's certain things that haven't been valued properly.
Yeah.
And when you start doing that, maybe just having higher marks isn't enough. You reach a threshold that beyond a certain point, you don't need them to count. Like you can't have somebody who's got such great marks that it negates every other thing that they've done.
Yeah, so it's just it's a really big, hard question, I think.
Right. So maybe the last bit that I wanted to pull from this was Drake Pendragon was saying, I disagree with free, and there's quotes around free college, because I don't want to be paying additional taxes to send a random individual to college. If I want to send someone else to college, it will be my niece. So here's the thing. This is another good example of anchoring, because if you start out with the assumption that something should cost money, then you need to justify why it shouldn't, or why you should be paying for it for somebody or not for somebody, right?
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing this is in the fight for universal health care in the U.S. And that's probably more accurate to call it universal secondary school education as opposed to free, because, listen, we know it's not free.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the shorthand for that person who's right there is not paying for it out of pocket, but it's paid for. It's not that their university professors are working for nothing.
And I mean, education provides value at the end of the day. Having an educated workforce and having people in a position, you can talk about just how it affects GDP, where investing your money smartly,
gross domestic product.
Yeah, where investing your money smartly in people gives you better returns than you put in just from taxes the way that they already are. Right. Or you could talk about the fact that there are a lot of big kind of issues and frontiers for expansion of human knowledge, and the more people that you have who have an opportunity to realize their full potential, the more likely you are, the larger pool you're drawing from, to find the sort of great minds of a generation that are going to be able to do really incredible things. Right. And I am a believer that people who aren't given the opportunity to, who might otherwise be able to be sort of a just incredible person to make huge swaths of change, they just won't if they're not put in a position where they have that opportunity. This
is the ultimate, to me, pro-life argument, where you are taking a life and you want to make the most of it.
Yeah.
We didn't used to, I mean, as a society, we did not used to pay for high school. High school used to cost money. Grade school used to cost money. And it's the same progression, right? In this world that we live in now, where corporations have the freedom, the flexibility, move jobs out of country, it is, like you said, it is a universal good to make education and skills acquisition as easily available as possible. And you don't want to have an underclass filled with people who can't afford an education or are forced to take jobs below the poverty level, because that's how you build resentment, and I love this word, foment. You foment a revolution.
What does that mean?
That means sort of build it. Because to me, all right, so I don't know the actual definition, but in my mind I was connected to, I know it's not ferment, but it felt, because you're building it up, and fermentation is that
now
process.
How do you spell it?
F-O-M-E-N-T.
Foment. Okay.
That's
our word of the week.
That's our word of the week. So I have to look up what it actually means, but I think I'm using it in the right. I shouldn't say I know. I think I'm using it in the right context.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the current U.S. government is trying to dismantle the public school system with, the what's her name, DeVos, who's pushing for education vouchers and stuff and taking money out of the public school system. I mean, people used to make a living even if they were illiterate.
Yeah.
And as the world changed and opportunities changed and jobs changed, government started funding more and more education, so that the people who could no longer, work on a farm or work as a blacksmith and not need to know how to read, they needed to make sure their population could keep up with the opportunities that were available. And it was a good thing. And it comes down to what you expect. If you assume a certain thing, then yes, if you assume that that education should cost money, well, then maybe you feel like you don't want to pay for
somebody else's college,
right? But I think that's a bad assumption, because I think it would be the same way healthcare is great, the same way not having a bunch of people starving to death.
Yeah.
I think education is the same thing.
And to me, I think the argument of I want to pay to put my niece through college, not to pay to put somebody else through college. If you're paying a little bit more money, your niece and also everybody else are all going to college.
Yes.
And we're not asking, and we're not actually asking for anything, but I think the people who are asking for free education are likely asking for it in a way that's much more complex, using, tax brackets. And ideally, Jeff Bezos is going to put your niece through college.
Yeah, that's true, eh?
If we're just talking about that, I think, marginal tax brackets and just asking for more of the people who definitely have way more money than they need to live a reasonable and good standard of living.
Okay, speaking of Jeff Bezos, I mean, I'm not even going to get into the whole Inquirer and Pecker, and that's his name. That was actually his name. I saw this perfect description that billionaires are like human dragons. Billions of dollars is way more than you'll ever need in your lifetime. They're basically hoarding gold.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos is a really soft dragon.
That's good. Yeah, no, so I
thought it was funnier than that. He's like a little soft pink dragon. He's like no scales.
I guess it got you in a way that it just didn't get me. But yeah, no, so I think the thing about that is that, in kind of the situation that I think I would be supporting for totally free post-secondary, you would be paying a little more taxes. That's right. Good things cost money. In an ideal world, you would be paying less taxes because that would just be defense budget restructuring.
And you wouldn't have to. There wouldn't be means testing. Like, part of the cost of a lot of these things has to do with the administrative costs, and you see it in healthcare, where the U.S. is paying way more per capita for the limited healthcare that they've got, because the insurance costs are so high, because there's so many different insurance companies, so much administrative costs, and we pay less in Canada for better outcomes.
Yeah.
So if you actually stop spending the money gatekeeping and just spent the money on actual education, I think the cost is a lot less than you'd expect.
Yeah, so in an ideal situation, you pay a little bit more in taxes because you're right, money doesn't come from nowhere. The people who are making an insane amount of money, and it's possible that you are a millionaire, Drake Pendragon, and in which case I would actually be asking to take more money from you.
But that's if he's a millionaire, that's not it. It's only if he's making like $10 million a year.
That's true.
That's not like, no, you know what I mean? There's a difference between a millionaire who's saved up enough and they're sitting on $1 million, and somebody who's making $10 million in a year. $10 million and $1 in a year. We're taking 70 cents of that last dollar.
Yeah.
Or we're not, but I'm saying the idea is. But sorry.
And your niece would be going to college, and all of your niece's friends and her classmates would be a more diverse group of people
and
than there would be able to be otherwise.
It's just the option.
And
it's the opportunity.
And I think all of that, it sounds like, and obviously this might come across as a little idealistic, but that's the world that I am kind of hoping for when I look at free healthcare. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's a lot from anybody who can't afford it.
Right, and I think maybe part of the argument is always, well, of course you're going to want it because you are of the age to take advantage of it, right?
That's true.
But, I mean, the flip side is healthcare. I've been a relatively healthy guy, except for my finger right now, and I have very little need for healthcare. I'm paying a crap ton in taxes, and I'm okay with that. I think it's good that we do not leave people to be sick and dying with the prospect of either dying or going bankrupt.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, free university would just mean more competition for me. I mean, it would be one thing to not pay for it, but I think in the long term, also having a huge, like a much larger population would make it harder for me to do whatever it is I wanted to do. But I still support it because I think, honestly, that if it's good competition, it's only because the people that you'd be allowed to let in are going to do a really good job if you just give them the chance. And not everybody, but there's going to be enough of them that, we're going to get the best people in the best positions. You talked about that earlier with the, mandatory, woman in certain positions of power. But I think if you really want to get the best people in the best positions, you've got to give everybody a chance to show you what they can do.
Right. That's a great place to end it, I think.
So there we go. Yeah.
So the hard part now will be putting up the right video to fit the length that we've extended this to.
Yeah. So to end off, we've got a Patreon, so if you want to support us a little bit so that we can talk a lot more about left-wing politics, and then occasionally when we feel about it, injustice. Yeah, when the mood strikes us.
I think it has more to do with the questions. I mean, these were actually direct responses to comments from people.
That's true, but we talked a lot longer about the questions about politics than we did about injustice.
Well, because is it that...
There's more to say.
There's more to say, and I think because a lot of the people who are coming to us for injustice, there's certain things we don't need to explain.
That's true.
Damage over time, we didn't have to explain.
So anyways, if you want to support the left-wing propaganda machine, you can go ahead and go to patreon.com/BDCKR.
The Canadian left-wing propaganda. So when you know it's Canadian, it's even way left.
And we are going to be funneling all of that money into socialism.
What the?
That's not true.
That's not true.
That's not true at all. We're spending it personally. But anyways, we'd like to give a huge thank you to the comrades who've already taken up the good fight and who have already chosen to support us. We've got Console Peasant, Eddy G, and Edwin Felix, who are supporting us at the highest last word tier. iProphet, who is supporting us at the Your Message Here tier, and there's a message that we will read right at the end because I need to access the segment titles. He told me to be ready this week, and I am, but I'm going to need just a moment. And then we also have Shawn, Farrell, and Daniel Simonson, who support us on the credited level. Okay, I have a picture here. Segment titles. Sorry. 1 second. I'm trying. Okay, this is iProphet's segment. This is going to be the Garage of Gags.
Gags is kind of an ambiguous word.
Oh, don't go there. So I feel like it was funnier when it felt effortless. Now that I've got to go kind of searching for it. But there we go, iProphet. I told you I would come back with as many segments until I ran out of ideas, and there it is. So this is his message to you, the viewers. How did Johnny Blaze complete his memoirs?
Oh, we're going there. We're going Marvel. How did Johnny Blaze complete his memoirs?
He used a ghostwriter.
Well, you know what's funny? Ghostwriter came out. Ghost Rider, sorry. They did a reboot around the same time, I think, as Punisher War Journal. I just mentioned that. I don't know why it occurred to me because around that same time, there was a crossover, I think, with Punisher, and Jim Lee did a guest book or a guest issue on that, and I actually met Jim Lee at Dragon Lady Comic Books, which no longer exists, on Queen Street down in Toronto. And what's ridiculous is, this is another one of those George R. R. Martin stories. There was nobody there. It was an evening. I had classes. It was in between classes. I had to wait for a test that I had to write.
I love that there's a category of stories that only you specifically tell that you've titled George R. R. Martin
It's
stories.
basically that, right? Where people who are hugely famous now, and you have to line up forever to see them, they were not that famous. And, you know, if you're just enthusiastic and a fan, you have such opportunities to meet people that eventually go on to become, you know, big names.
Our videos have gotten weird. We've managed to ramble after the Patreon thanking. Wow. Should we thank them again?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Let me thank them this time.
You've stuck with us.
Yeah, big thank you to Console Peasant, Eddy G, and Edwin Felix, iProphet, Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Laszlo Giorgiades, and Chris Wolf.
Yeah, you guys are really sticking through us through thick and thin. I don't know if this is what you wanted, but this is what you're paying for. So I hope it was worth it.
And thank you also to all the viewers and listeners who make this possible.
Oh, please let us know if you've gotten to this point. I feel like this video, I can't tell. Maybe I just don't think enough of ourselves, but it feels like a little bit of a test of endurance to the point that we've gotten to. Thank you. Yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Komoda.